Hi, this is Dr. Joe Vitale, and welcome to The Wealth Trigger. Before we get into some of the specifics and some of the scripts and some of the inductions that you'll be getting to experience, let me tell you a little bit about my life journey. It's real important to understand that I wasn't born wealthy. A lot of people may look at my world and my work and say, well, he's written 53 books. Many have been bestsellers. He's been in numerous movies, from The Secret to The Compass. I've been on national TV, from The Larry King Show to Donnie Deutsch's big show, The Big Idea. I've been on CNN and CNBC and ABC and Fox and Friends, and the list goes on. And of course, I have numerous audios out there, everything from The Secret to Attracting Money, to The Missing Secret, to The Abundance Paradigm, and a whole lot more than that. I have many DVDs that I sell. I have a big website over at MrFire.com. I have many other projects going on. So if you look from a distance and you look at this point in time, you might think, oh, Joe's always been wealthy, Joe's always been famous, Joe's always been successful. But that is not the case. And it's worth a moment to explore my own past because you may be able to relate to this. I think the overall message is no matter who you are or where you are right now, your life can transform. You can be dramatically different with a few changes. And even if you're not wealthy right now, you might even be struggling right now, you might be without work right now. After you go through the wealth trigger, you can be on the other side of all of that. And I can say that because I was a guy who was brought up as a lower middle class person. I was born and raised in Ohio. My family struggled. This is from the 1950s, 1960s, and so forth. And my father was the breadwinner, but it also meant that he worked what seemed like 24-hour days, and he was always gone, and he was a laborer. So I learned early on that you had to work and sweat doing things that you did not like in order to attract money. So my upbringing was like many people's. It was one of struggle. It was one of desperation. It was one of feeling like a victim. Even though that was the case, I didn't starve. My family did take care of me. My father's still alive. He was taking care of me back then. He's still doing fine today. He's the Jack LaLanne of the family in many ways. He's 85 years old and still going strong, still getting up and working out every day. So he's done fine. But when it came to the wealth training, I think there was a lot lacking, and there might be a lot lacking in your own life as well. Because even though I went through high school, I went through college, and after I left it, trying to find my fame and fortune, I went to Dallas, and very quickly, I was homeless. Now, how does a person become homeless? I was not somebody who was into drugs. I was not somebody who was into alcoholism. I was following a dream. I had a very pure intent. I wanted to be an author. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be known as somebody who wrote books that people admired, and I wanted to make my money from that. So I was trying at something that was noble, but it was not working, and I was failing. I had saved some money when I was in Ohio. I took it. I got on a bus. I went to Dallas. I gave most of the money I had saved to a company that promised to give me work overseas. Now, this is back in the 70s. And in the 1970s, there was talk of building pipelines in the Middle East or in Alaska, and they would pay you a great deal of money if you would take on that work. My master plan at the time was to get a job doing that, work for a year or 2 years, save all of that money, and then go on a sabbatical where I would write my great books. I would write the great American novel or plays or nonfiction books or poetry or whatever I wanted. I would be free. Well, the company I gave that money to went bankrupt. The man who owned the company committed suicide. Now, at that point in time in the 1970s when I was broke and I didn't know very many people and I'm in Dallas, Texas, where I didn't know anybody, and I had no home and I had no car and I had no other resources, I had no idea what to do. And before I knew it, I was on the streets in the most literal way. Some people have often said, well, if you were homeless, what kind of car did you live in? Well, as I mentioned, I didn't have a car. Homeless to me was carless, homeless, and everything else. I slept in church pews. I slept on the steps of a post office. I slept in places that even today I've forgotten about. For the longest time, I didn't even talk about the homeless years because it was too unpleasant. It was very traumatic. It was one of those things where I just as soon would forget it. Didn't want to talk about it. The only reason I'm telling you about it today is because I want to help inspire you. I want you to realize that, well, if Joe could be homeless at some point, then no matter who you are and where you are, you can elevate your circumstances and you can begin to pull the wealth trigger and attract money. And you'll learn how as we go through this program. But let me go back to my story. So I was homeless for a while. Somehow I managed to get to Houston, and to be honest, I don't remember how. I could have hitchhiked. That was still popular back then. I could have managed somehow to get the money to get on a bus and go from Dallas to Houston. I honestly don't remember. But Houston was no picnic. I struggled. At that point in time, it was a boom town. And at least as a laborer, I can take one job. If I didn't like it, that same afternoon I can get another job. Of course, always doing labor, always doing things I hated, but I could get work. And I worked for temporary agencies. One I remember was called Manpower. And Manpower could get you a job doing any kind of labor, pretty much with a phone call. And I did that for quite a bit. I did everything from driving a tractor-trailer gas truck to driving a cab, one of the worst jobs I ever had in my life, to doing odd jobs. I was even a reporter at one point, making minimum wage and doing all kinds of odds and ends. Point being, I was not happy, and I was struggling, and I was desperately looking for a way to get published, definitely needing to find a way to find that wealth trigger and pull money into my life. And yes, I even had to file bankruptcy twice, which was not a pleasant experience either, because all of this, the homeless years, the poverty years, the bankruptcy years, all of this really hammers at your self-esteem, and it did mine. So I felt like I was a loser in the world. I felt like it was me against the world, and I felt like my hopes were being dashed against the rocks of reality, and that my chances of actually making it in the world were actually nil. But I kept going. Now, why did I keep going? I think a large part of it had to do with the fact that I was always addicted to books. Now, there's positive addiction and there's negative addiction. My positive addiction was I love the library, I love self-improvement books, I love the success literature of the day. These are the books like Think and Grow Rich and The Magic Power of Believing, or The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol. All of these books were in my consciousness, and I would always turn to them as friends. And even though I wasn't seeing the outer changes, I was doing my best to encourage myself, to educate myself, to inspire myself. And I would read the biographies of a lot of the great authors and teachers like Jack London and Ernest Hemingway. These people inspired me. So I kept working on myself, and I kept trying to find out, what do I need to do inside of me to make changes? Now, I knew a little bit about hypnosis at that point, and in fact, I had learned how to hypnotize one of my best friends when I was 16 years old. So my experience and education with hypnosis goes way, way, way back. But I didn't have anybody that was educated to teach me how to change my thoughts on a deep level using hypnosis to help me get clear of those thoughts that were stopping me from attracting wealth. So here I was struggling, here I was trying to make a difference, but there was a tug-of-war going on because part of me wanted to have money, yet this deeper aspect of me felt like I didn't deserve it. Because my self-esteem was hurt. My self-love wasn't there anymore. My own value had been diminished because of the homeless years, the poverty years, the bankruptcy, and all of that. Still, I would go to talks. If there were free talks at different schools or churches, I went to them. The positive thinking talks always gave me a little bit of a spring in my steps. I kept reading the books. I kept reading things like The Magic of Believing, one of the all-time great books, and of course Think and Grow Rich, and all the books by Napoleon Hill and some of the other success authors of the day that are still around. They're considered classics in success literature. All of that was helping me. And the other thing I was doing that everybody needs to do is I was taking action. I was constantly trying. Even though I was suffering, I continued to write. I was writing articles, I was writing scripts, I was writing poetry, I was writing everything I felt like writing. I was following my passion. And this was all before the internet, of course. I'd have to put it in an envelope, put stamps on that envelope, send it out, and then wait, and wait, and wait for an editor to pass judgment on it. And I, of course, looked at it as passing judgment on me. And before I knew it, I was getting rejection slips, one after the other. I had heard that famous authors like Jack London actually papered the walls of their apartment with all the rejection slips they got. So I was in good company. And though it hurt and it slowed me down, I kept taking action. And I think it's this aspect of taking action, working on myself, reading the literature, doing my best to change my thinking is how I began to overcome obstacles. Now, this was not an overnight sensation because, again, this was before the internet. This was before all the information about how to use hypnosis for yourself was out there. And I was struggling on my own. Part of me was just coming from an ego trip anyway. I wanted to do it on my own. I didn't want help. I was coming from a very macho perspective that said I had to do it in order for me to be successful. Well, that was also a thought I had to release. Because the more I understood that if I can turn to resources, whether they were audios or they were books or they were people, coaches, mentors, the more I can open myself to their help, the faster I would begin to change. So how did I begin to change? Well, part of it was reflecting very deeply on the programming that got me to being in poverty and homeless and bankrupt. Now, this is something that I want you to reflect on as well, because we're all in a trance of one sort or another. It doesn't feel like it because the trance you're in feels like it's your reality. But your reality is based on your perception, and your perception is based on your beliefs, and your beliefs are coming from your upbringing. So I was brought up to think that money was very difficult to come across. I was brought up to believe that money was something I had to sweat and do things I hated in order to have in my life. And I was brought up to believe that money was scarce. Well, all of those are beliefs. Those aren't facts. That's not reality. That's not something we can all agree on. But a lot of us are going through that experience because of the upbringing. So I had to stop, take a deep breath, look at my upbringing and go, oh, my father, the culture, the media, the government, movies, television, all of it is programming to think money's bad, money's evil, and money is limited. Well, that's not going to help me attract money. Now, a big one for me was when I realized, and this is during the homeless and poverty years, that I actually was experiencing those despicable times because I had modeled myself, my life, on the lives of people like Jack London and Ernest Hemingway, who led adventurous but self-destructive lives, and both of them ended as suicides. I woke up one day and realized that a whole lot of what I was going through was a direct result of my thinking that was the curriculum for me as a writer. I thought that if I want to be a great author, a classic of American literature, like my heroes, Jack London and Ernest Hemingway, then I had to lead a self-destructive life. I did this unconsciously. This is a big point. We do almost everything unconsciously. This is why hypnosis is so valuable. What we do is awaken from the trances we put ourselves in. We awaken from the belief systems that we've been wearing that cause us to create the reality or attract the reality we're experiencing. All of this can be changed once we wake up. When I woke up to realize that I was modeling myself after people that I probably shouldn't have been modeling myself after, I should model their writing styles but not their lifestyles. Once I realized that I had a choice, I can look around and find authors that were wholesome, that were prolific, that were prosperous, that were productive, that were balanced, that were healthy. And when I found those authors and began to model them, my life began to change again. So what we're really talking about in order to implement the wealth trigger is becoming aware of the trance you're in when it comes to money and programming, and be aware that you can make a choice once you wake up from the old programming. In some ways, what you're doing is exchanging one trance for another. There's the trance of limitation, which most of us have struggled with, and there's the trance of abundance, which I now live in. Well, I prefer the one I'm living in, and I welcome you to join me here. So in this particular program, you're going to hear a little bit more about hypnosis. You're going to learn a little bit more about how the law of attraction works with hypnosis. You're also going to get to experience some deprogramming and reprogramming scripts led to you by a world-famous expert. And we're going to talk about how the mind works, as well as my giving you a few case studies of people who have changed their lives. Not just me, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have changed their lives because of hypnosis. And I'll tell you a few of those stories. Now, the whole purpose of this is to help you pull the wealth trigger and begin to attract money in your life. The beauty about hypnosis is that this is very easy and effortless. You don't have to do hardly anything. I'm even speaking to you in a way that's considered hypnotic. Sometimes when I talk, there might be a little bit of a rambling going on. Well, one of the greatest hypnotherapists of all times, Milton Erickson, was known as the rambling hypnotist. Now, why would he ramble? He would ramble in order to confuse your conscious mind while talking to your unconscious mind. Now, keep in mind, you have a conscious and an unconscious mind. The conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg. It's what you're using right now to wonder about what I'm talking about and to reflect on what I'm talking about. But your unconscious mind is bigger, vaster, deeper, and oh, so much more powerful. That's the operating system in your life. When I speak to you and tell you stories, I'm entertaining your conscious mind. But deeper, under the surface, I'm saying things to help rewire your unconscious mind and reprogram it so you can have wealth in your life. You can finally get the job. You can get more sales. You can get the income you want. You can live the life that you've been longing for. Milton Erickson had one of the greatest success rates when helping people achieve their dreams and heal their problems. He was a fascinating man, but he told stories often in a way that were hard to follow in order to get your conscious mind to drop its engagement with him. At that point, Milton Erickson was speaking to your unconscious mind. Well, a lot of that will be taking place in this amazing program because the Wealth Trigger is designed to work at the unconscious level. It doesn't matter what you're thinking on the conscious level. If you're entertained, great. If you're educated, great. If you're inspired, great. It doesn't matter because the real work is taking place unconsciously. And as I pointed out, that's where the work needs to be addressed. Because on the top level, the conscious mind, you're thinking, yeah, I want that job. Yeah, I want more sales. Yeah, I want my website to rake in the money. Yeah, I want to be able to live this life of luxury and have the abundance Joe and others talk about. That's on the conscious mind. The unconscious mind might have all kind of baggage from your upbringing and all kind of beliefs from the programming you receive that interferes with what you want to actually attract. So trust. This process works. Trust. Hypnosis works. Trust. The scripts and the inductions work. Trust that what you've been longing for, the wealth you've been seeking, is coming to you now. I'm Joe Vitale, and welcome to the Wealth Trigger.